Throughout my final years at Stanford and after graduation, I was actually, the youngest PM at DeepMind. Waymo, self-driving cars, balloons that give people Wi-Fi, robots that do agriculture. It's kind of a dream job. I actually dropped out of Stanford for a few months to do this, but I actually really didn't like it. In AI, you need economies of compute, of data, and of capital to do research. So only I at DeepMind or someone at OpenAI could do that. Whereas in blockchain, you have people all around the world publishing these white papers, and then within months, they would implement them in smart contracts. AI was about to create infinite abundance of content. You and I, from our bedrooms, we can create Hollywood-level content, share it with the entire world, and that's a great thing. But how do you actually create incentives for people to create content? How do you create a business model around that content and network effects around that content if everyone's able to produce hours and hours of content with a single prompt? That's going to be a big problem, and it can only be solved by blockchain. Hey everyone, I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders of Story Protocol, and before Story, I spent some time as a product manager at DeepMind. So Story Protocol is building the world's IP blockchain, and what that means is that we're on-ramping this trillion-dollar asset class of intellectual property and making it programmable and accessible to everyone. We think one of the biggest problems in creativity today is that creators and their communities have no way to really own IP and interact with it outside of existing mainstream intermediaries like studios and centralized platforms. So what we want to do is allow creators to take ownership over their IP, set the terms for how others can use them, and allow anyone in the world to access this global repository of IP, almost like a GitHub for IP, using smart contracts and using blockchain as the database and the settlement layer for all these different interactions. Ultimately, we imagine a next generation of consumer apps will build on top of Story and almost enable an IP Legoland on top of the entire internet. I was born in Shanghai, China, and then I moved with my parents over to the US, to Texas, when I was 5. I actually didn't speak any English when I moved to the US, so my mom actually had to follow me around in kindergarten and translate for me because I couldn't talk to the other kids in school. I actually remember my first memory of the US. It sounds trivial, but it was very meaningful to me, which was going into the lunch line in kindergarten. And the thing that I noticed was, number one, you could actually select what you wanted to eat. Like, you had different options. You could have eggs, you could have pancakes, and then at the end of the line, when you checked out, as a kindergartner, you could have extra packets of salt and pepper and ketchup that was free. The idea that had so many different options and that you had different choices in this land of abundance, that was really just very impactful for me. As I got older, one thing that really inspired me was looking at these stories of tech entrepreneurs. And I would just voraciously read those. And I think to me, it was really just something about the true potential of any individual in this country, in America. I think being a technology entrepreneur is one of the ways that you can make the most impact. And it's one of the ways that you can take advantage of the opportunity. It's crazy to think that a single person and an idea and a team that they put together can reshape an entire generation of consumer expectations, can reshape an entire generation of creativity in the case of Apple. I just really caught on to as magical at a young age, and I've always known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I actually used to be quite religious. I became a Christian. I actually helped my entire family convert to Christianity, but then when I got into high school, I started studying the world history, right? So I started learning about the different religions, and to me that really brought about a little bit of a crisis in faith, where I thought, wow, there's so many different world religions, which one of them is true? And in high school is obviously like an angsty time for people, and so when I had that crisis in my faith, I needed something to replace that, and very luckily I found philosophy. I started reading the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online, some of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca. I started reading Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, some of the existentialist philosophers. That really helped me because it gave me a sort of guide to answer the biggest questions about life. What is the meaning of life? What am I meant to do? Those sorts of questions were what philosophy helped me with. For me, the fundamental insight of philosophy is not that it's religion, that's secular. It's not that it provides you with concrete answers. So the way I think about philosophy is there's philosophies that teach you to be a better human and teach you what you should do as an individual and how you should think about life. But then also what I was worried about, or what I was interested in, was not just, hey, how should I live my life as an individual, but also how should society be structured, right? Because I had this experience of going from China, which is a communist country, and had very different social structures than the US, which is completely different, founded on 100% different ideas, 100% different culture, 100% different government. So that's why, when I went to university, I actually studied political philosophy, because I was interested in how can we actually create better societies in general? And what is this big picture view, right? So how do we think about justice? How do we think about legitimacy? What does the ideal state or country or nation look like? So for me, philosophy is both micro and macro. I think in high school it was more about the micro. Why is there suffering in the world? What do I do as an individual? But as I became more sure about those answers and more sure about what I wanted to do, then the question became, on a macro scale, what are we all doing together? And what's the best way to arrange society? Philosophy is a practice of asking good questions and providing some good answers, but that opens the door for other people to argue back, to provide better answers through that interplay of reasons. So I've always believed that philosophy is a tool, it is not a destination. And so I can't say that I just read one book from some philosopher and now I know the meaning of life, right? That would almost be exactly the opposite of what philosophy is. It would almost veer into religion or faith or patriotism or whatever that answer is. So I can't say that I have a concrete list of absolute principles that I must follow. But to me, one of the animating forces of my life is I think about our species as a whole. And I think about how we've evolved from these well, Plato would call us hairless bipedals, right? Like we're just animals that don't have hair that walk on 2 feet. You know, we came from almost like apes in these small tribes, essentially animals. And in the past, 30,000 years, 50,000 years, look at the rapid change that we've been able to make. Like look at the fact that we've been able to invent agriculture, and with agriculture develop complex political systems and laws, and the concept of money, and the concept of culture and of art. And we have produced Da Vinci's, we've produced Newton's, and now we've produced the internet and we've gone to space. And I just think that's very inspirational. So to me, there's something very aesthetic and very motivating about this idea of moving the species forward. It's almost a challenge. Like we are almost like a challenge to the universe, right? We have this big, vast sky. We don't know if anyone else is out there, and yet we're still trying, and we're still moving forward, and we're still, we're these little creatures going to the moon, which is just this rock that's like right next to the Earth, right? So we have so much more to explore. But I think it's this idea that we as a species, even though we are individually very small and feeble and very dumb, and collectively we make a lot of mistakes. We go to war with each other. We spend a lot of time fighting over relatively stupid things. But in the long run, we've just achieved so much, right? And so to me, one thing that animates me as an individual is how can I contribute to that story? It is very much this is a story. It's a narrative. It's almost literature about what we can do as individuals and as a species. And so for me, I've always admired the individuals that are part of that human story, and they really represent the best of what our species can be. And so for me, entrepreneurship, like I said, it's part of this grand vision and this philosophical framework of our progression as a species. And I think we have so much more to grow. We're just in the very early days. And right now, entrepreneurs in our society, in the 21st century, they are the people that, in my opinion, are doing a lot to move the species forward, right? Of course, there's arts and there's culture and there's politicians and military leaders that are also very important. But right now, in this era, given the godlike technologies we have, I think in this century, this is what entrepreneurship is about, is being part of that human story. And so if I had a philosophy, it's the philosophy that humans are individually perhaps not that excellent, but together and through visionary leadership, we can do amazing things. And so I've always really respected that. And so for me, it was how can I combine this interest in philosophy and thinking about the biggest questions with this interest in entrepreneurship? To me, Stanford was a place to do that. And so I think that's how I think about those two sides of my life. I really can only be motivated by sort of intellectual ideas where I find philosophical and historical interest. And then instead of writing about it, I try to bring it through life through entrepreneurship. When I went to Stanford, I did study computer science, so I had to take a lot of coding classes, and I actually thought, I wanted to be a very technical, I wanted to be a computer scientist, right? And I wanted to be an engineer. I looked up to, let's say the Collison brothers as very technical entrepreneurs. I looked up to, of course, Elon as a very technical entrepreneur. So I first joined DeepMind's because to me, AI is one of the most exciting technologies. For me, when I was at Stanford, I actually spent almost all my time there in the AI department. I was doing AI research with PhDs. I was working on different computer vision and reinforcement learning projects. Throughout my final years at Stanford and after graduation, I was actually the youngest PM at DeepMind. But when I actually, I spent some time at Google X, which is the moonshot factory at Google, where they're working on Waymo, self-driving cars, balloons that give people Wi-Fi, robots that do agriculture, robots that can go around the house and do all the chores. These very moonshot ideas. So I was a software engineer there. It was kind of a dream job. I actually dropped out of Stanford for a few months to do this as a software engineer working on some of these AI projects, but I actually really didn't like it. One thing I discovered there was Even though I am very technical and I love thinking about technical concepts in computer science, what I love more, what I was jealous of, was always the people there who were running the product and they were talking to users. And that was really exciting to me because it's this idea that this technology actually touches someone and actually makes a difference. And so I was always trying to be in the conversation with our customers. I was trying to always be in these product design conversations. And that's kind of when I realized, like, despite my love for software, it's really not this pure intellectual interest in code itself. It's about what that software can do. That's when I knew that as an entrepreneur, I want to be technical, but I also want to have this view of the product. I want to have this view of the strategy, because that's actually what the technology is being used for. If you just build technology in a vacuum, it's not that exciting to me. There was two reasons really that I found it almost unbearable and I had to quit. Even though it was initially my dream job. So number one was, I've been involved with crypto to some degree for a very long time. Like as a teenager, my parents wouldn't give me money to buy video games, so I had to find ways to make money online, right? So when I was a teenager, my interaction with crypto was very much more superficial, I would say. So I was, in some of the ICOs in 2017, I was mining Dogecoin because it was the only thing I could figure out. And so yeah, that helped me buy some games because my parents wouldn't let me buy games. But I wasn't really that interested in the technology or the philosophy behind it. But around 2020, 21, when I was at DeepMind, I started rereading these white papers. So I was rereading the Bitcoin white paper, Ethereum white paper, and this was DeFi summer. I started reading Uniswap white paper, all these core DeFi protocols. And one thing that's really interesting about cryptocurrencies and blockchain as a technology is that it is inherently philosophical. Unlike other technologies like AI and VR that are also just platform shifts, those started in mainstream labs, some Harvard or Stanford professor or some large trillion-dollar company. That's where they came from. But blockchain came from this guy that no one knows who they are, Satoshi, Vitalik, these cyberpunks. In AI, you need economies of compute, of data, and of capital to do research. So only I at DeepMind or someone at OpenAI could do that. Whereas in blockchain, you have people all around the world publishing these white papers. And then within months, they would implement them in smart contracts. And then months later, there would be millions of dollars being transacted. People would try to fork it. They would try to build apps on top of it. They would even try to hack it, right? And so that's just a very open, evolutionary Darwinian ground where research was translating to production in a very, very fast and exciting way. So that was very exciting to me. And it was all happening in the public with this open source ethos. Philosophy and being intellectually interested in something is very important to me. So when it came to researching these white papers, I noticed the very different philosophies that were animating blockchain technology, right? In 2020, 21, the entire blockchain space was talking about DAOs. How can we have decentralized autonomous organizations that govern themselves? And the conversation there was almost more socialist or communitarian. People were saying things like Uber should be restarted, but the drivers and the riders should have tokens. They should have some sort of ownership stake in this project, right? That's very different from libertarianism. That is almost like some sort of socialism or co-op style political governance. And then of course, one other part of the space is that it's just this global market, right? So you have people who are obsessed with prediction markets, or obsessed with having the ability to trade across the world with minimal friction. That's pure capitalism, right? So you have libertarianism, you have socialism, you have pure capitalism, and all of these different ideologies are reflected through the mirror of blockchain. That's really exciting to me because whenever you see a technology that's a political mirror that can make promises to many different beliefs, that's how you know you have something very, very powerful. And that's happened for AI, and that's now happening for blockchain, and that really interested me about the space. What was even more exciting was the fact that you look around and there's not many mainstream use cases, especially outside of finance. It's Bitcoin as an immutable store of value. It's stablecoins as instant global settlement with low fees. It's DeFi as a replacement to some of the centralized financial system. But blockchains can do so much more than money. That was my thesis. And to be honest, if you look at the biggest businesses in the world, it's not JP Morgan. It's Facebook, it's Apple, it's Netflix. It's these consumer companies that create media and create culture and allow others to contribute and remix that culture, right? So ultimately, that's what people spend their time doing. They're not on Charles Schwab for 10 hours a day managing their 401k or their finances. They're on TikTok, they're on Netflix, they're on Facebook. And so to me, the idea of blockchain as a source of digital property rights was extremely exciting. And because I had worked in AI, I understood that AI was about to reshape creativity. AI was about to create infinite abundance of content, right? You and I from our bedrooms, we can create Hollywood level content, share it with the entire world, and that's a great thing. But how do you actually create incentives for people to create content? How do you create a business model around that content and network effects around that content if everyone's able to produce hours and hours of content with a single prompt? That's going to be a big problem, and it can only be solved by blockchain because blockchains are digital scarcity, provable scarcity, and AIs are infinite abundance, right? So I found that blockchains to secure intellectual property rights, blockchains as infrastructure for creativity, was almost obvious to me, but no one was doing it. And because no one was doing it, you're actually really limiting the scale and the impact of this technology, because you're not able to reach consumers that don't care about DeFi, that don't care about finance, that they just want to own and create and remix and consume content. So that's kind of how the vision for Story started. And to be completely honest, I quit DeepMind knowing not exactly what Story would look like. I quit DeepMind not knowing SY. I quit DeepMind because I just knew that I couldn't stay there anymore, right? Like, I just knew that this was the future, that I wanted to work on blockchain technologies, and that I couldn't wait. So I actually quit, and every day for 3 or 4 months I just woke up, and I didn't really know what I was going to do that day, but I knew that I was going to hack on some projects, I was going to meet interesting people, and I was just going to make it work, right? Because I just had so much conviction in this. Even though DeepMind was a dream job, for me it was the easiest and the best decision I made to just quit, not even with a plan, but just trust that, you know, this vision and this interest would lead to something great. I started writing the white paper pretty early on. It was one of the first things we did at the company because, like I said, so much of building a network is about building the principles and almost the constitution of the network so that you can have almost a guiding light for yourself, for the team, and for the community. The fundamental principle behind the white paper is that just like blockchains made money programmable, and just like they enabled an internet of peer-to-peer value transfer, we will also, through Story, unlock an internet where creativity, where intellectual property, where ideas have property rights. And not just property rights, but that those property rights can be programmed. So that every piece of content on the internet, whether it's on Netflix, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on a decentralized application, it's registered on Story and has an API for rights that anyone, whether they're a developer, an individual, or a creator, can interact with. That's the vision, and it's really about the next era of creativity, and we really do think that building this infrastructure will lead to a renaissance where instead of, you know, having the same movie, Avengers, you know, 4 Avengers movies, 5 Spider-Man movies, 7 Harry Potters, and then many more sequels, right? I think that what we want is a future where culture is more vibrant, culture is more bottoms up, and it's more owned by the creators and their communities, right? And so without making IP programmable in the same way that DeFi and Bitcoin and blockchains made money programmable, that's not possible. So the fundamental thesis in this white paper is, what does the world look like, and what do we have to do in order to make intellectual property fully programmable? We actually started off as a protocol company, so we built a set of smart contracts. We deployed them on, you know, Ethereum. We deployed them on other testnets like Polygon, and this was the original vision. But one thing we realized was that as we were supporting different partners in this way, we weren't actually realizing our vision in 2 ways. So the first way is we weren't creating a global IP repository. We were creating local IP databases on every blockchain, and they couldn't communicate with each other. So instead of creating this grand continent or united continent, this Pangea of IP where anyone can interact, we had a bunch of little islands, right? So it was like an archipelago. And that's not really the vision that we wanted to bring, because we're not building enterprise SaaS. We're not building a custom database for each partner. The whole point of Story is to create a global composable ledger, a settlement layer for intellectual property from every different platform. So we needed to have our own block space. And another important part was that, you know, unlike many other blockchains that are optimized for money and for payments, IP is fundamentally networked. So if you think about the structure of creativity, it almost looks like the graph of open source code. It almost looks like the way that Linux grew. It's a graph. Let's say like Smash Bros, which is a game, you have 30, 40 different characters that are being licensed in, right? And so that graph is like 40 little parents licensed into one derivative. And so when you want to compute over that graph, existing blockchains are just not optimized for that graph traversal and that computation. So even something as simple as paying royalties from one IP all the way to all of its parents and all of its parents' parents, you have this exponentially explosive computation. And we needed to build our own blockchain to really tailor and optimize to be the world's creative computer, not the world's financial computer like some other blockchains are focused on, but really a blockchain focused on IP. And so this idea of needing one single blockchain to compose across all the different IPs, whether they're on-chain or whether they're off-chain, and also this idea of customizability and really tailoring the blockchain for IP, those were the reasons why we actually, over time, over a matter of over a year, we pivoted and really double down on this infrastructure vision to become the world's IP blockchain. And one of the biggest challenges is that this isn't something that people have done before, right? If you're building a vertical SaaS company, or if you're building even an AI company, there are models for you to follow. There are books you can read. There are examples of startups that have failed and have succeeded. But we're doing something, it's almost like there's no template. So it feels like you're grasping at thin air. Like, how do you compare yourself to existing businesses? How do you compare yourself to traditional businesses or crypto businesses? Like, who are even the right comparisons to think about? Who do you even take example from? A lot of that we had to figure out in the first month, and not just in the first month, in the first 6 months, in the first 12 months, and that's still a question we ask ourselves. So it's sometimes frustrating, but also very exhilarating when you're doing something so new that you're not sure if anyone's done anything like it, and so you have to take the bits and pieces that are relevant to you and integrate them into your strategy, into your products. And of course, we can learn from experience, because to some degree, all businesses are the same, and crypto businesses are no different. But to some degree, it's also very much, you have to have a very strong conviction in the path you're going down, because there's no one to tell you, 5 years ago someone did this and it was right or wrong. You have to just figure it out yourself. So that's why I say it feels like free fall, because at any moment it feels like you can make one really bad decision and crash. But if you just have conviction, and if you're very, very methodical, and you listen to feedback and you iterate rapidly, you are still falling, but you're falling around the earth, right, in orbit. You're not crashing to the ground. So I'll start by talking about what's not different in crypto, because to me, this is also really underaddressed. A lot of times people say crypto is completely different, there's no rules, and yeah, it's completely different, but I think people forget, at the end of the day, whether you're Rockefeller, whether you're Carnegie, whether you're Jobs or Gates or Musk or Vitalik, you're building, to some degree, a business, right? And so there are fundamental principles that are the same. And a lot of times the biggest failures in crypto have been when entrepreneurs and leaders, they think that there's no principles at all, and that they can rewrite all the rules of physics, of business physics. And that's just not the case, right? So there's always the best practices. You always want to have the best talent. You always want to generate revenues. You always want to serve your customer. And oftentimes, the worst of crypto is when people forget that, right? They're just trying to shill a narrative that doesn't have any product, or they're not listening to their users. They're not trying to make revenue. And so I think I want to start by saying there's still a lot of things that are similar, and there's a physics of business that we need to respect and learn from. But then there's so much that's different, right? And where crypto is very different is, number one, you have to think about the origins of this technology and the way that blockchain works. So the origins of the technology is that it's very visionary and philosophically driven technology, and that hasn't changed. So when Vitalik wrote the Ethereum white paper, that was what came out first. He had this white paper, and he rallied all these amazing developers from around the world to help him build that vision. That vision is still being built out today, right? It's not done yet. So in crypto, you have to start out with a vision, and it doesn't have to be a white paper, but you have to articulate a vision of where you're going to go, and rally and inspire people to back you and build that vision together with you. And the reason why that's important is because in a historical sense, crypto is the mix of Web 1 and Web 2. Web 3, as some we call it, it's a mix of the open protocols of Web 1, the HTML, the HTTPS, the SMTP. It's a mix of that open source ethos where you're building something that's standard and neutral with the monetization that Web 2 introduced, right? The platforms generating so much revenue. And so really what Web 3 is, it's open source protocols essentially that can also capture value and store states. So it's not just a dumb piping of HTML and of SMTP. It's not just the pure monetization with no openness of Web 2. It's this combination of open source with value capture built in. And so you have these open source principles where you have to rally people to build with you. And so you have to share the vision, and that vision is very important. And oftentimes that vision comes before the product is finally finished, right? So that's a very important part of Web 3 because it has this open source ethos, and it's a mix of a Web 2 business and a Web 1 protocol. The other part that is very interesting is that ultimately you have to build a community and a culture. And so while the internal parts of building the business looks very similar to building a Web 2 company, you want to hire the best talent, you have to have different policies for promoting them, you have to figure out how marketing works with the design team, you have to figure out how the product team works with the ecosystem team. All these things are part and parcel of any Web 2 business, but the external face, like I said, you're almost in some ways like a political leader. It's almost politics, right? You have to align people onto your vision because ultimately, and this is a good thing about Web 3, is that it's about consent, right? Like you can't force people onto your platform. You have to work with them and they have to build on top of you. And if no one adopts your standards and your protocol, then it doesn't matter how good it is. So you have this almost political movement element to crypto that is very unique. And the last thing I'll say is the reason why this is also important is because AI and VR and these other platform shifts, they are tools, right? And this is something that Chris Dixon says a lot. They're tools. They're single player. You can go on ChatGPT You can ask a question, you're alone in a room, you don't need anyone else, right? It's just you asking a question, it's like a hammer. I don't need someone else to use a hammer, I just use a hammer. But think about blockchain, right? How do you use blockchain without other people, right? There's no point of using blockchain without other people. I'm sending money from you to me, I'm sending money to my family. Like, you need some network, right? So blockchain isn't a tool, it's not single player, it's fundamentally inherently multiplayer. It's a network. And so you're building a network, and that's very different from building a tool. And that's why you have to have this vision, you have to have this alignment, you have to almost be like a sort of state or a political leader. And that's a very interesting part of building a crypto business. There's a lot of criticism, so I think one of the most interesting ones that I find is a very valid concern, and I want to address it, is how can any of this be enforced, right? It's a very good question to ask, and one that we ask ourselves a lot, which is, at the end of the day, what if I just right-click save as Mickey Mouse, I upload it to Story, and I say, hey, I created Mickey Mouse, now pay me all this money to use it, right? That could happen, right? We're a permissionless protocol, and every permissionless protocol needs to think about how it can be misused and have solutions to that, right? Otherwise, things will go wrong very quickly. So one thing that people maybe don't know about Story is that it's not just about blockchain technology. It's about marrying code and law. So we really believe in this idea that put forth first by Lawrence Lessig, who was a Harvard professor, that code is law and law is code. Now, Lawrence Lessig was talking about that idea more in an analogy way, where he was saying, you know, if you have Twitter and you limit the tweets to 140 characters, that's code. That also becomes the law of this social platform, right? So he was using it more as an analogy, but I really see Story as turning it into a reality. So we've actually spent just as much time on the legal side of Story and creating this programmable IP license that allows every piece of content on Story and every license interaction to be backed by the law. And that's really important, because that's the difference between I'm just minting a collectible, a pointer to a media file on chain, and I'm actually minting IP. Real intellectual property, right? It's not just a media file, it's property. And so this connection between the legal system and the on-chain system is extremely important. And it also answers to some degree this question of enforcement, which is, let's say everything goes wrong on-chain, all of our dispute modules don't work. At the end of the day, the worst case scenario on Story is the best case scenario today, which is that you have a license that you can go to court with to protect your work, right? And even the presence of this license itself, it's going to deter a lot of bad actors, right? Because people know if I violate this, then there's a chance that, you know, I could go to court. And so even that presence of the license itself and the presence of this link between code and law is enough to prevent a lot of bad actors from getting involved, right? This idea that we are just focused on pure technology and not thinking about the legal system at all is how people ask that question. But my answer is, enforcement is also a legal question, and we've done, just like USDC, you know, they've done all this work to make sure that they can bring money on chain. And when it's on chain, it's just an ERC20 token. You don't have to think about all the regulation. You don't have to think about all the finance stuff. It just works. It just works on Uniswap. It works on any DeFi protocol. Same with Story. The Story just works once it's on chain, right? And you just use it. You can use it on OpenSea. You can create new protocols on it. It's composable. But if you want, or if things go wrong, you can off-ramp. You can off-ramp it, and you can go to court, and you can protect your IP. And that's very important, and I think underlooked in how Story functions. What is blockchain? I mean, this is a philosophical question, but ultimately blockchain is an intermediary, right? It's an intermediary that allows people to directly interact with each other without anyone in between, right? So instead of having a lawyer as your intermediary, instead of having a platform or an app store as your intermediary, you have a set of code, smart contracts, as your intermediary. That's what blockchain is. So ultimately what we're doing is writing almost a constitution for how IP works on chain and letting people participate in this economy of IP, of digital property, and to set their rules and allow other people to follow their rules and to have money settle as a process of those interactions, right? So it's hard to say, you know, platform layer, I mean, they're all kind of getting at the same idea, which is, yes, there's IP that's stored on Story, and then there's interactions that happen to that IP. But as a company, right, that's helping develop this technology, we're not owning anyone's IP, we're not the custodian, we're not even involved with any of these arbitrations. We are just building the rules, the pipeline for these interactions to happen. And then the software, it's credibly neutral, it's decentralized, and that's the intermediary for all these interactions. So people can build on top of the software if they want, and in some ways that's like an app store. But unlike Apple, you know, we're not setting who can join or who can leave the app store, what the economic terms are. I mean, people can take it or leave it, and they can build applications on top however they like. Our go-to-market strategy is in many ways quite simple, and it rests on two fundamental principles. So the first is that we are very, very focused on real world use cases. And what that means is that we have a product that solves a problem. We know that this is a problem because people on our team have faced it. They've been in media for decades, and we just know some of the problems in the space. And so we're building something that we think a lot of people have a flaming problem around, and it's just a huge pain point. We're not doing something that's easy, and anyone that's going to use Story is also not doing something that's easy. We're solving a real-world problem with blockchain in a way that, to be honest, a lot of people have tried and failed to do. And very smart, very talented, very well-intentioned team. So it's not easy, but one thing that makes Story, and our top priority is to empower the best entrepreneurs to build lasting businesses using our technology. The philosophy behind Story and Story Academy is that we are almost an incubator that supports the next generation of consumer apps that are using Story, right? And I think a common misconception is that somehow the fate of all of these apps depends on Story's success, right? Because I don't think that's the case, because we've actually built out this technology, it works, and it doesn't matter whether Story financially succeeds or not, that technology just works. It's on chain, it's on a smart contract. No, we can't take it down if we wanted to. If the company shut down, we couldn't take it down, right? So it's about, why do people bet on us? Well, for many reasons. One is, the most important one is that they desperately need what we're building. We're solving a problem for them, and just like with Kaiser, just like with Mahojan, they're doing something that they wanted to do, but they couldn't do without Story, right? So that's the most important thing, is not the support we're giving them, but the fact that we're solving a problem that couldn't be solved otherwise. And then on top of that, of course, as a company, we really want to make sure that the builders succeed on Story. Well, Sekai, with Kaiser, the CEO and founder, he has key access to our office. He comes in multiple times a week to use our office. We've introduced him to all of our best investors, and got him a seed rounds led by A16Z. And we have 2 calls a week with Kaiser. He has access to our entire team, and it's almost like we're helping him incubate the project, right? So no other project cares as deeply, I think, about just making sure that these partners succeed. Because for us at Story, if our developers and our entrepreneurs that are using our software, they're not succeeding, then we're not succeeding, right? So we have this very developer-focused approach where we think that developers, they're solving very specific problems for creators. And so instead of going to the creators directly, we're saying, look, Kaiser, the customer that you're building for, we just want to make sure that you're supported, that we're solving real problems for you, and that you will go and solve these problems for creators in turn, right? So that's kind of our go-to-market strategy. It's very real-world focused. It's very concentrated bets where we know the team very well, and then it's also very developer-focused where we're focused on entrepreneurs. So if you are ready for the challenge, and if you are someone who is a creator or understands creators or has always wanted to start IP-focused business, we want to talk to you. My top priority and the entire company's top priority is to support you, to solve your problems so that you can build the biggest businesses possible and solve all these problems that are out there in creativity. This is not going to be a short journey. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to look like a lot of other crypto companies, but I think if that's something that motivates you, that challenge, rather than scares you, then I really recommend you talk to us. You know how to reach us. We're on Twitter. We're very accessible. Just shoot me a DM or shoot anyone at Story a DM, and let's get started.